A visitor to the committee. I'm pleased to tell you, Commissioner, that the committee has just voted to give a mandate to the rapporteurs on mutual recognition of qualifications, concessions, and the two public procurement directives for us to start negotiations with the Council with a view to reaching a first reading agreement. So I think we're looking forward to making substantial progress. But we've been working very closely with Council and Commission in the detailed examination. So I think that's an important step forward for Europe and also for the Single Market Act 1 and 2, because those were key planks for the Single Market Act 1. So we're a bit behind the timetable, but I think, on the other hand, we've done a quality job so far, so I don't regret that. So anyway, we're very pleased to welcome you here, which is in the framework of the structured dialogue on your work programme for the remaining term of office, for your remaining term of office and also the remaining time of this Parliament. So we look forward very much to what you have to say to us. And I know you've given us some as always, you're very helpful in giving us progress reports on all the work that you're doing. So I'm very pleased to give you the floor, and then we will take questions from members. So the speakers list is open, so I'll put obviously the... Right, we've got lots of people on the speakers list already, but I will... Obviously the coordinators will have a go, but I saw Mrs. Styler and Mrs. Sheldon-Rose already, and the voting list is open to anybody else. Commissioner Barnier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Cher Malcolm, bonjour à chacune et chacun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Malcolm. Good morning to everybody. I'm very happy to be back in this committee, which is my committee for a lot of different reasons, and to bring you up to date on what we have undertaken together in order to get this great community, this economic and human and social community, which is the internal market, working together. We need to see how to move together in the spirit that you just mentioned, Mr. Chairman, on specific texts which are before your committee. Perhaps you'll allow me to get right down to brass tacks on certain of the texts that we've put to you under the Single Market Acts, the first or the second. First of all, what I could call the quick wins. Reform of public procurement and professional qualifications. You have decided to embark on the trilogue straight away, and of course we'll be playing a constructive role in that. First of all, on public procurement. Work has been very intense. Mark Tarabella has just left, but I'm very grateful to him for the work that he's done, together with the other rapporteurs and coordinators. My view is that our respective positions between the Council and the Parliament are not that far from each other. The Commission will remain vigilant as work starts on certain sensitive subjects, what I could call local protectionism and public-public cooperation. We have to make progress here. This is a very important reform, both because it simplifies administrative constraints which are too burdensome for SMEs, and because it's a matter of strengthening the internal market, and also, of course, because it's a matter of, because if we can better use public procurement in a cleverer way, your chairman was talking about innovation, social inclusion, protection of the environment. I'd like to go into slightly more detail about concessions. First of all, to thank your rapporteur, Philippe Jouvin and the coordinators for the work that's being done. You know why I put this text forward at the same time as the public procurement text. There wasn't even a minimum regulatory framework on this instrument of concessions, which are used more and more often as part of public-private partnerships. And I think that we need a minimum regulatory basis which is transparent, which is non-discriminatory, for this instrument in the single market. Once again, in order to protect citizens. So thank you for the work that's been done. I've often said how important it is to consult, to have public debates, firstly, of course, here in Parliament. I pay a lot of attention to public debates because there are very often questions that arise in these debates, or false accusations that are made. And I want to be very clear publicly now in front of your committee, both on behalf of the Commission and as a politician and as a citizen myself. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that the Commission is not looking for any kind of privatization of water, not today and not tomorrow. This directive does not aim and will not produce forced privatization of drinking water services, not today and not tomorrow. And anybody who imagines that I could have put forward a text of that sort doesn't know me. It's quite the opposite. The text as drafted clearly recognizes the freedom of member states and reaffirms that freedom and the autonomy of local authorities in this field. It's local authorities who will be defining what they consider to be services of general economic interest, and they have a free sovereign choice in the matter of how best to manage these services. And that is guaranteed in the treaty. It's Protocol 26. There is no European law which can go against that principle. That's a fundamental principle. And I want to repeat here that it's my determination as well as my conviction that that principle be observed. I've spoken to several of you about this, particularly Evelyn Gebhardt and Andreas Schwab. And I know the Citizens' Initiative, which has collected 1 million signatures, and I think that's an excellent thing. Apart from one sentence, I could be perfectly happy signing this initiative myself, safeguarding water as a public good. I've got no problem with that at all. I'm very keen on water quality, as any citizen is, as a former environment minister of my country as well. There's only one sentence that I couldn't agree with, and I say this to the citizens who've signed it, when it talks about taking water out of the internal market rules, because that wouldn't be in the interest of taxpayers or citizens or the petitioners. If it's entrusted to private operators according to the free choice of the local authorities, then competition rules must apply. And the same thing applies to having European criteria on water quality and environmental protection. Otherwise, a citizen who was a Finn or German or French who moves to another country, he is not going to be sure that he can have quality water. So the criteria have to be the same. There have to be in single market rules to that effect. But subject to that reservation, I could perfectly happily sign this petition, which urges that water be regarded as a public good. Having said that, well, ladies and gentlemen, I've just told you what my convictions are. They are clear and strong convictions. But there are still misunderstandings and questions. So to respond to the concerns that are being expressed in Austria, in Slovenia, in Germany, among other places, and in order to avoid misunderstandings, I'm prepared in the trilogues which are about to start to support further clarification of this text on concessions. I've spoken to your rapporteur, Philippe Jouvin, who indeed has made some suggestions. And I think that will be right in line with what I've said several times to Andreas Schwab, and I'm grateful to him and to Mrs. Gebhardt and indeed to Mrs. Rühle and Mr. Kreutzmann, all of whose individual points of view I respect. Now, what's the main difficulty here? Well, it's the Stadtwerke in Germany, the so-called multi-sector ones. These are companies which are traditional water suppliers and therefore have a protected public monopoly on distribution of water in their areas. And in other forms, these things exist in other countries apart from Germany and Austria. Nobody is challenging or undermining that position, that legal position. Not now and not in the future. But these are companies which are often also active in areas that are open to competition, like energy and transport. And there, and we're still talking about municipal companies, there you have companies with a broader activity. And the present rule, which isn't one that I invented, the Court of Justice in Luxembourg and several German courts, there's a Frankfurt court judgment and a Hamburg judgment as well, which confirm this in implementation of the treaty. Taking the example from our Special Sectors Directive, the present rule is that even when they have private capital, these companies can benefit from non-transparent, non-competitive, directly awarded contracts from their municipalities, subject to two conditions: when they're really controlled by the municipality and when 80% of their activity is on behalf of the local authority. Now, the problem that has emerged more clearly, that I've actually more clearly understood in the course of the debate, hearing particularly from German and Austrian local representatives, is that these multi-sector companies may have a lot of their activity in other areas that are subject to competition, like transport and energy. Then they don't usually meet the 80% criterion, which would mean that they were subject to competition and would lose their special status. Now, I want to find a solution, a fair, balanced solution to solve this problem jointly with you while avoiding distortions of competition. So this is what I was talking about with your rapporteur, Philippe Jouvin, who's proposed a form of words which I'm prepared to support in the trilogues that will start. And this will say that the 80% rule will apply only to water activities, not to the whole turnover of this municipal company, the Stadtwerke. So the 80% rule will not apply only to water activities. So there might have to be then separate accounting between the public activity on water and the private activities, energy and transport, for example. And in the same way, I think we'll have to adjust the definition of what are called bound companies in order to deal with the special purpose companies or the municipal company that very often works also for neighboring municipalities or nearby ones. So I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I've taken up a bit of your time on this question, but that's the step that I'm prepared to take. That's what I'm prepared to support, having spoken to your rapporteur and having listened to all views expressed in the debate. So the present text, to summarize it, will end up with a clear guarantee that territorial bodies can still deliver on their own account water to their citizens, or subject to certain conditions, they can hand this over to a municipal company or a special purpose company jointly owned between several municipalities. And it's only when they act as a private company, as an external company, that they'll be subject to the transparency and non-discrimination rules that the directive contains. Now let me say something about professional or vocational professional qualifications. Once again, with thanks to Bernadette Vergniaud and all the coordinators and rapporteurs for their work, the professional card, the transparency mechanism in regulated professions, the other major steps forward that have been achieved. There are points which are still open, and there the Commission in the dialogue, in the trilogues that are about to start, will be constructive. Telegraphically, I could mention a few professions where we have to find compromise solutions. Notaries, firstly, there are divergent views which emerged in the vote, and they did in the Council as well. At the moment, we can't take a definitive decision. The Commission's attitude will be constructive and open, I can tell you. Veterinarians and midwives, important professions, difficult professions in daily life. We have to find the most precise possible framework for them. There are signals coming from the stakeholders that they don't all agree with the proposals in the report. I don't agree with all the proposals in the report. So the essential requirements are what we have to concentrate on for these two professions, and we can perhaps address later in delegated acts certain further details. And lastly, the points about mobility in the directive. These are important rules about mobility for professional practice. And I hope that we'll be able to return to the question in the next few weeks, bearing in mind always that the aim is to facilitate mobility and to simplify and to modernize. Now, I know you want to keep to the status quo, return to the 5-year issue. There, too, I think we'll have to work with the Council to find a balanced solution. Now, having mentioned those major aspects of public procurement and professional qualification, which should, Mr. Chairman, be brought to a conclusion in the next few weeks, I want to talk in more detail about the Single Market Scoreboard 1 and 2. The 12 key actions are a priority here for you and for me, and 2 have been formally adopted by Parliament. 3, on the other hand, are subject to political agreement and are waiting for formal agreement very soon. And I hope that under Irish presidency we'll also be able to get to something on the Accounting Rules Directive and the electronic signature. And that will bring us up to 10 of the 12 key actions on the Single Market Scoreboard. But there are still the 50 supplementary actions on which I'd like to see progress and indeed conclusion by the end of the year. Then in all this, there's one major thing that interests a lot of you, which is the Services Directive. We have to have an ambitious implementation here. We have to aim to get the greatest possible growth potential out of this directive. There are some ambitious aims in our communication of last June. We need a lot of mobilization in all member states to support this, and I said this at the Competitiveness Council again the day before yesterday. And I also need your assistance, the push and the vigilance of your committee, particularly Anna Maria Corazza Bildt's initiative in her report. I'm very grateful for. I've heard good reports of the hearing that she organized. There's a set of complementary actions. A high-level group on company services has been set up. It'll meet for the first time at the beginning of March, and there are 2 initiatives which I'd like to mention in this connection, adopted on the 31st of June last by the College of Commissioners. The Retail Trade Action Plan to get competitiveness there, and then there are 11 specific actions, and then there's a green paper on unfair trading practice, which is going to launch the first pan-European consultation on the subject. And I very much hope that your IMCO committee will be able to participate in that consultation. SMA 2 is also on the right tracks. And I can confirm that we intend to put all our proposals on the table under that SMA 2 by the autumn, so that then by spring next year we'll be able to have moved forward with adoption. There are 3 proposals already on your table: the modernized rules for insolvency, the 4th package on railways, and more recently, last week in fact, the general product safety and market monitoring package. And the Commission also took a decision setting up a new EURES portal and a package improving the implementation of the 3rd energy package. And lastly, still on SMA2, I can confirm our commitment to bring forward speedily something that I, like you, are very keen on: the access to basic banking, bank accounts, and transparency of charges and mobility of accounts, and very high speed networks. Which brings me to the digital single market, which is probably where companies and citizens are expecting most progress and modernization from us. We have to meet that expectation. We have to improve the way the digital single market works. We have to improve communication, creativity, sale, purchase on the internet. In particular, I'm grateful to Pablo Arias Echevarria for the work that he's doing on e-commerce in your committee. Among the many actions that have been undertaken, the Commission is still working with a view to 2015 on e-commerce on the basis of the action plan adopted in January 2012. A few months ago, we put forward an initiative on delivery of packages. And next month, I shall be putting forward a report on progress made. The fact is that on the major single digital market things, a lot is already on the table. Rights, copyright, licensing Europe. Other proposals will come on electronic billing and payment services. And that will cover a very broad field, but I have clearly heard your idea of putting a sense, giving a sense to all this, bringing all of this together. And your chairman, Malcolm Harbour, was the first person to mention it to me. So that the main content of this, we think, perhaps not the only content, of a Single Market Act 3 would be that, and I'm happy to work with you on that. The only question is if this year, say in the autumn, we launch Single Market Act Mark 3, mainly dealing with the digital market, perhaps including some things from Commissioner Kroes and Commissioner Šemeta. We still also have to make some progress on Single Market Act 1 and 2, because if you put the third phase forward, while all the other proposals in 1 and 2 are still up in the air, that would be subject to criticism. So we've got to make a lot of progress on 1 and 2 this year. In conclusion, let me mention governance and public debate. First of all, let me thank Andreas Schwab for his report and his vigilance. On the follow-up to the results of the scoreboard, the online single market scoreboard, we shall be publishing this before the summer. I agree that there should be a conference on this, devoted to this subject of governance, organised jointly with the European Parliament. And perhaps the Lithuanian presidency in September will be able to bring peer pressure to bear on member states. Last Tuesday, we put forward the last scoreboard on transposition of internal market rules by the member states, where considerable progress can be seen in just a few months with the new lowering of the European average for non-transposition. Has now gone down to 0.6% from 1.2% in February of last year. The other key element here, of course, is your IMCO committee's commitment to the report on integrating completing the single market that's due in autumn, and the governance cycle contained in the European semester. And in conclusion, the very first forum, in the spirit of our first forum in Krakow and the Single Market Week, I should like us to be more ambitious in 2013, which is a sort of stock-taking year and a perspective year for the single market. I'd like us to have a whole month to be called the Single Market Month, somewhere like October, or 20th of September, 20th of October 2013, 4 weeks of public debate using social networks to the maximum, perhaps facilitating the setting up of thousands of little thematic groups in all regions of all member states directly connected to us here in Brussels for 4 weeks, as I say, on subjects like citizens and their banks, digital single market. There are a whole lot of subjects that you could identify to single out those 4 weeks of the single market month. And I'll be happy to work with you on this, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 documents to give you to make your life easier. The SMA 1 and 2 scoreboard, our working programme for 2013 as it bears on your IMCO committee, and the internal market scoreboard number 26, which tells you the progress that I've been talking about on transposition. Thank you for your attention.
Well, Commissioner, it's clear that you're going to keep us extremely busy right up to the elections. I can see that, which is very good. And I think the energy with which we work together is notable. And we're really pleased at a number of new initiatives, and particularly about the idea of continuing our programmes around the single market, particularly centred on the digital single market, which is very exciting, which is something we'd already asked you for. And I've already made a note of Single Market Month here, so I'm sure you all got that in your diaries, because it would be good to reach out before the elections. The coordinators are going to be meeting in a couple of weeks' time to talk about our planning and strategy for the rest of the mandate, particularly on political initiatives, because we only have a certain number of reports to work on. But I think you've given us a lot of material now, which we will feed into that meeting. Now, colleagues, the Commissioner can say slightly beyond 11:15, but I think I have about 15 members who want to ask him questions, which would take most of the time if all of your questions are a minute, even if your questions are a minute. So I just want to see, do the coordinators want to speak first, or can I allow some members also to have a go? Coordinators, are you bursting to ask questions? Okay, well, I think we'll open out to people who showed first. But if you could keep your question to a maximum of a minute, and Panos will just give you a little clock to help you. So I'm going to start then with Mrs. Styler, and Mr. Rochefort, and Mrs. Le Grip in the first round. And I think we may need to take 4, actually. So we'll have Mr. Schaldemoser as well. So Mrs. Styler, Mr. Rochefort, Mrs. Le Grip, and Mrs. Schaldemoser will be the first 4 questions. So please be ready and on the button with your question. Mrs. Styler is first for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to have you, Commissioner. I was interested in your point you were making about licensing and copyright. You had a meeting a few weeks ago. In particular, I'm interested in the subjects of e-book access and libraries having access to books in an e-format, and we do not want to see a digital apartheid happen to our libraries, where at the moment many publishers are not allowing libraries to have access in an e-book format. So I just wanted you maybe to expand on the licensing issue. I know that you're trying to get stakeholders to come together and I think report back in 6 months, but maybe you could go in a little bit of detail on that particular issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Setting a very good example. Mr. Rochefort is next for a minute.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner. We all recognise the progress made in the internal market here, and we welcome that here. I would like to say, however, that there are sometimes image issues that can emerge, and they can really damage all the progress being made. I'm thinking about the horse meat scandal of a couple of weeks ago, a few days ago. And that gives the impression that the internal market is first and foremost exchanges between several countries, speculation, and in any case, something that isn't a health problem for consumers, but really a problem in terms of misinformation, perhaps. And I'm saying this because we're a year away from elections, and it's very important that communication on the internal market is rebalanced so that consumers can see that it's in their favour. I think it really does need to be focused in terms of consumers, perhaps rather than SMEs, which I do think is very important anyway. And Commissioner, you mentioned this hearing on services. Well, it's been said that consumers today are not yet aware as to how obstacles are being lifted, how buying in a country that's not theirs would enable them to have competitive prices. So in a year's time, we really need to have something to show consumers and the general public, to show them how the internal market is a good thing. Thank you.
Not to make speeches, but to ask questions, Mr. Rochefort, especially on topics.
Une question. La dernière phrase était une.
There was a question there, the last sentence.
And you also talked on a topic which has nothing to do with this committee. Apart from that, it was a perfect question. Mrs. Le Grip is next.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner. Thank you for your introduction. A couple of questions, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. Firstly, communication on the internal market intended for the general public. I mean, this is a major challenge. We welcome progress in the internal market, but the general public, not only companies and professionals, but consumers and citizens need to be aware of the challenges and the progress that has been made, and also their rights in mobility and professional qualification, recognition and so on. All of that needs to be made closer to citizens. So what's going on with this portal? Is the traffic on this portal satisfactory? What can we do on that to help? Second question relates to China and access to public markets. There are several investigations currently being carried out by the EU, for example, on telecommunications equipment. Could you tell us whether there's an overall strategy vis-à-vis China, particularly with regard to companies' access to Chinese public markets? Thank you.
Tak for det, herr formand. Jeg har 2 kommentarer.
Thanks, Chairman. A couple of comments. Well, questions, really. Firstly, Commissioner, I was very pleased to see that there are recommendations on publicising information and also responsible advertising, particularly for betting companies, online betting companies. In Denmark, we have a policy that perhaps isn't all that responsible on this, so we're following the recommendations very closely. Second point on the digital market. Well, I think it's important to improve internet access speeds. Perhaps, is there any initiative with regard to introducing better connecting equipment in our smartphones? Because sometimes it's not an issue of internet speeds, but it's our devices that are the problem. And this is something that could be dealt with in the internal market.
Right, I'll get the Commissioner to respond to those, but just to put on notice then, because we may not be able to get to fit everybody in. I think it would be good if Mrs. Vernier and Mr. Jouvin took the next 2 questions in their roles as rapporteurs, because their role has come up, and also Mrs. Corazza-Bildt on her report, and Mr. Arias to respond on the digital single market. So we'll have those are 4 ones that are relevant to you, and then we'll see how we get on with the coordinators and others later. So if Mrs. Vernier can be ready. No, after the answers. I'm just putting you on notice to be ready with your 1-minute question.
Oui, je vais essayer de respecter la même discipline.
I'll try and be as disciplined as the others and try and be brief. If I have to provide more information, I'll try and do it in writing during the coming days. Mrs. Styler mentioned copyright, and that is something I'm responsible for. And we have established a clear line there. The strategy that I propose, that I got the Commission to adopt on the protection of intellectual property. We wanted to ensure that intellectual property and copyright are brought up to date. I mean, things have changed a great deal over the last 15 years. We've seen the emergence of the internet age, and we've seen progress in Europe. We've already established some parts of this strategy. The directive on orphan works is part of the response to the digital access of library collections, and that's been adopted and is now being implemented. Collective management is still under discussion, and there is this idea that I proposed of territorial licenses. We've also discussed audio-visual matters, and also to move faster than perhaps we could with laws, together with Mrs. Kreutz and Mrs. Vassiliou, who worked with me on this. We're launching a limited and constricted time period idea for contracts with stakeholders. This is something that we launched just a few days ago, and we hope there's going to be tangible progress as a result of this. We hope that, for example, members of the public who cross a border who have a subscription in their country will be able to use their subscription in the next country, which is something that they can't do at the moment. And this is what we hope to achieve with this work, licensing Europe. Mr. Rochefort brought up the food safety crisis that we're seeing emerge in several countries. I mean, this is essentially fraud, I'd say. And the justice system will be responsible for handing out responsibilities, assigning responsibilities there. But and we'll want to see sanctions on those who committed this fraud on consumers. But I think there are lessons that can be drawn from all of that. We could orient our actions more towards consumers, perhaps, and my colleague Mr. Borge will be able to answer in more detail. I have a very constructive and fruitful dialogue with the European Consumers Association, and I see them regularly. In my specific field, Mr. Rochefort, I can confirm that apart from what I've already done in several financial directives to try and protect consumers and give them the best possible access to information, which they haven't always had with regard to toxic financial products, for example, we're going to, in a few weeks, ensure that there is transparency in banking costs on people's current accounts, because that hasn't always been obvious, and also on banking mobility. I mean, with food issues, I think we could also go further. That's a personal view on a subject that I know quite a lot about, to ensure that we can go further on traceability. I mean, I think even on cooked products we need to say where the ingredients come from. That's not something that would be going too far for me. I think consumers have a right to complete transparency. And it's not something, transparency isn't something we should be afraid of if the products are of high quality. Mrs. Le Grip mentioned citizens, as you did, Mr. Rochefort, and also the Europe portal. It's a single window regarding to defending citizens' rights and information, and it also companies also use it, and they can find all the information that they need on that single portal. And, for example, depending on their needs, they're sent to the Solvit portal or elsewhere. Now, these are tools that are bringing Brussels closer to the general public, to citizens, to consumers, to businesses. And we've also got the internal market indicators here, which is also helping bring Brussels more down to the local level. For example, that means that a Polish mayor can ask questions of a Finnish company that perhaps works in Poland, and there's also translation there. The question can be asked in Polish, the answer arrives in Finnish, and vice versa, and that's something that's working for 6,000 administrations now. We now have 15,000 users per day, Mrs. Le Grip, who use this Your Europe portal, and the numbers are increasing every day. I think there is also good cooperation with physical and social networks as well. Now, China, public sector markets. China is not yet a member of the GPA, the Government Procurement Agreement, hasn't signed up to that, which we renegotiated at the end of last year, and we managed to get major partners who have signed up to the GPA, such as the US and Japan, to open their markets a little bit more. I would recall that together, that Mrs. Le Grip, that we presented a programme, something on which you had a hearing yesterday, I do believe. And the idea there is not to close our markets, but to ensure that other markets open up, that there is reciprocal opening up of markets. I mean, there are problems in Europe and there are problems in the US. There are a dozen, perhaps, states or sectors that are more closed in the US. And we're trying to see a coordinated opening up of these areas. And we don't want to see everything happening in a haphazard manner. But I would like to see that the GPA is implemented in a more coordinated manner in Europe and also elsewhere. But myself and Mr. Groot are working hard to ensure that China signs up to the GPA as well. We also heard about online issues, and I recently presented a program on online gaming. An initial debate, I think, was held yesterday with your rapporteur, Mr. Fox, here. There are 5 main priorities there: ensuring that national regulatory frameworks are appropriate, improving administrative cooperation, particularly benchmarking, exchanges of good practices between national regulators, protecting consumers and the general public, particularly young people, who are the most vulnerable when it comes to these areas, preventing fraud and money laundering, and also a subject that I pay a great deal of attention to, which is ensuring the integrity of sport. I'm a big sports fan, so we're working on all these issues, taking account of what's been done in several countries, such as France, for example, because we don't want to damage what's working well. But I do think we need a common platform in Europe to ensure that sport retains its integrity. We want to fight against match fixing, for example. We want to protect people's health as well. We want to fight addiction, and we want to protect young people. I mean, I'm not a technical chap, and going on to the issue of internet access, I'm sure there would be solutions that could be found, but I'll be asking as to how internet access can be improved for the general public.
Okay, that's a big variety of questions that we've covered already. Now I'm going to now have a round of 1-minute interventions, which will basically be a rapporteur's round plus our chairman of our working group. These are all people you mentioned in your speech. This is my criteria for this. So I'm going to start with Mrs. Vanier, Mr. Jouvin, Mrs. Corazza-Bildt and Mr. Arias for 1 minute each. Mrs. Vanier, you have your 1 minute.
Well, I'll try and be quick. Thank you, Commissioner. You have already answered 3 questions that I was going to raise, so I'll drop those. But when it comes to the directive on vocational qualifications, you mentioned certain professions that we still need to discuss. Now, I have a problem resulting from the vote, and that is the problem of professional insurance when it comes to mobility of professionals, because that is essential to bring back confidence, not just for the people concerned for legal certainty, but also for citizens, and to assure better information for the people in these who are employing these professionals or using these people. Because the issue of insurance is extremely important, and at the moment there are people who want to go from one country to another, doctors for example, and they end up having to pay twice as much in terms of insurance. It's not good for them, it's not good for citizens.
Petite question. Comment... No, 1 minute, sorry. Mr. Jouvin is next. You did very well. Perfect minute question.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you very much, Chairman. Commissioner, earlier you mentioned the issue of the petition which is being signed in a certain number of countries in the EU on the concessions directive. I think there are 2 categories of people who sign it. Those, first of all, who really believe there is a danger of water being privatized and who are afraid of that. And you mentioned a few points. I'd like to come back on those briefly. And a second category of people who, I think it has to be said, are exploiting this petition for political ends. You know, if you want to get rid of somebody's dog, you say it's got rabies. If you want to get rid of something at European level, you say it's because it's going to be privatized. It seems to be the way to do things. But people are afraid of privatisation. You mentioned some technical issues. Can't we also formally, in the legal text, set out some sort of statement saying that this will not lead to privatisation, set out in Article 1, enjoying the full force of law?
Thank you very much. Mrs. Corazza-Bildt.
Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, Commissioner. On the Services Directive, thank you for mentioning my hearing. I think it was very good, actually. We're all happy to support you in your position of zero tolerance on when there's not complete and total implementation. So my question is, what can we do in our European Parliament report to help you and to work together so that we can be constructive here and come up with real answers that will help the Member States? We've got the Schwab report now that we're adopting on governance. Perhaps I could ask you if you could use that to focus very closely in terms of the European semester, the Services Directive. In 2010, the Commission was producing reports on the Competitiveness Council. That doesn't happen anymore. I know we're in a different phase now, but I think we really need more transparency. We want to know more, and the European citizens have the right to know more as to why this hasn't been implemented properly. More transparency, more accountability. Can we not reintroduce? It's just an idea I'm throwing out. We can discuss other ideas as well, so that Member States will be able to tell us why, with all these jobs that aren't being produced, are not being created when they don't actually cost much to the public purse. Thank you.
Mr. Arias.
Muchas gracias, presidente. Muchas gracias, comisario.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioner. Well, I'm not going to be asking a question. I'm going to be responding to what you said in your intervention on the possibility of a Single Market Act 3 in the digital area. The Single Market, the Working Group on the Digital Single Market welcomes that idea. We think it's a wonderful idea because it would be very important to organise all the ideas and actions that we've suggested in this committee. So from that point of view, I'd like you to know that we are available to do everything possible to help from this committee and from the working group to ensure that this Single Digital Market Act becomes a reality. Thank you.
I'll ask Michel Barnier then to deal with those questions, and then we'll just see if we have time to squeeze in anyone else, but let's deal with those first.
Well, I'll try and be brief on these very specific questions so that we can get to a third round if you should so desire. Bernadette Vergnaud, amongst other subjects that are still unresolved, if you like, open for trialogue on vocational qualifications, she mentions an important point, which actually crosses over into other sectors as well: portability, reciprocity, coherence in terms of insurance systems. If we have obstacles to the internal market because of this, if you're looking for the insurance that companies need, or people who are going to work in other countries that are not their own. On this particular topic, in my DG, I've started consultation with stakeholders, with insurance companies. You're right, because it's not just a question of security and safety of citizens, but it's also a question of the internal market per se, because there may be discriminatory practices that have crept in which don't fall within the spirit of the internal market. So we will be having this dialogue with the insurance companies, and hopefully we could find some sort of solution there. If not, maybe we can work on this in the trialogue to try and avoid these stumbling blocks or these issues that exist for consumers. Mr. Juvin, above and beyond what I've already said, I think in terms of a clear, formal and strong undertaking that the Commission has no intention, neither now or in the future, to privatise water, which is a public good, I'm happy, in the interest of the consumers, to sign up for that petition, apart from the one sentence, as I say, I would have a reservation on. So I want to provide that sort of guarantee. There is no intention to privatise water. I'm happy to find a form of words that we could introduce in Article 1 formally on the Concessions Directive, if that would help. Mrs. Corazza-Bildt mentioned work that she wants to see more transparent, and I think the scoreboards that we use I think do that. And I did talk to my services yesterday about this, try to bring things up to date, looking at the different chapters, because now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, we're getting to the details. And the director in charge of this, Claire Bury, I hope would be able to come here and talk to you to show point by point, sector by sector throughout the services directive in great detail how this is working with the member states. But I can agree that we should have a competitiveness council report. It'd be all the more useful because if we want to be successful, the member states have to be prepared to do their share of the work as well. And also on the European semester, we have Olli Rehn and we have the competitiveness chapter in the European semester. The European semester shouldn't just be an issue of budgetary surveillance, sanctions, of austerity, words which are quite tough, especially for people at this time. We talk about growth, we talk about jobs, we talk about competitivity. So let's, use those terms as well. Let's look at that. On the implementation of zero tolerance, maybe I can recall in 2001, the Stockholm European Council was looking at transposition that shouldn't go beyond 1.5 years. It was 2.5 years was the average. And that was actually achieved 5 years later in 2006, about 1.5 years. In 2007, the Brussels Council reduced that to 1%. And now we've got 0.6%. So we're looking at serious progress having been made. I think the objective to go down from 1 to 0.5, I think, is a good target to have. Thank you, Mr. Arias. Mr. Arias, the group that you chair is important because it's open to the stakeholders. I'm happy to work with you and your group. It's a very constructive and useful group to work with, with a view to Single Market Act 3, which there may be a large amount of that dedicated to the digital single market.
Well, I think the Commissioner's indicated we can do one more round. Let me tell you, can I just check how many coordinators would like to speak who haven't spoken? Let me tell you who's on my list so far. Mrs. Weiler, from the members, I have Mrs. Weiler, Mr. Kreutzmann and Mrs. Irigoyen-Perez, and I need to just know how many coordinators would like to go. Mrs. we haven't heard from the Greens at all, so Mrs. Ruler, I think, must be top of my list. Mrs. Gephardt, anybody else? Mr. Bielan. I think we should hear from Mrs. Ruler and Mr. Bielan, because we haven't heard from their groups yet, first of all. Then I think I will take Mrs. Weiler and Mr. Kreutzmann can perhaps speak for the Liberals. Mr. Manders is being very abstemious. Then Mrs. Irigoyen, and I will. Well, can you decide between you which of you would like to place the question? And then. All right. Oh. Okay. No, that's fine. All right. Well, let's take everybody then. Let's take everybody, and then if you can get your questions done in less than a minute. All right. So everybody, all the coordinators want to go then. Let's get started. All right. Let's start with Mrs. Ruler then.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I've already prepared a press release saying that I think we've seen a great deal of transparency brought in by you. I'd like to thank you for what you said on multilingual companies. This was one of the main problems in Germany, Belgium and Austria, and I think through what you've said there's been a great deal of clarity brought in. There's one unresolved issue, however, and it's about horizontal public cooperation, which often crosses member state borders, and there's a proposal there, actually quite far beyond what the ECJ has already said on this, that these public bodies in future will only be able to work on the basis of common obligations and rights. Now, this generates problems if you're talking about smaller states, for example, or municipalities. They won't be able to get the efficiency gains that would accrue to good public-public cooperation. So because of the large level of debt and deficit in the public sphere, we need to be looking to efficiency gains of a modern administration.
Thank you. Mr. Bielan.
Dziękuję bardzo. Chciałem
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask about the internal market scoreboard. The communication from the Commission was extremely optimistic because 23 countries, it says, have achieved the 1% goal of the deficit of transposition, but 4 countries have not achieved that. And Poland, my country, is one of those countries. It is shameful because Poland organised the first single market forum. So I would like to ask you about the activities of the Commission pertaining to those 4 countries. And you, as a member of the College of Commissioners and French, I'd like to ask you about VAT on e-books. The Commission was to deal with this issue in 2013. Can we count on that? Poland would like to cut down on VAT on e-books, but cannot do that due to the applicable directive. Thank you.
Manders.
No, we agreed already.
Ich wollte mich auch kurz bei
Yes, I'd just briefly like to thank the Commissioner on clarifying on the directive what's actually happening there in Germany. And ignorance, of course, is terrible, but maybe I should leave it at that. I do have a request, and this is maybe something that needs to be sorted out as well, into municipal cooperation. There's some municipalities that are sharing road sweepers, for example. I'd like Mr. Juvin to look at this as well. I'd like to thank the Commissioner for what he said, because it's a similar sort of thing.
Mrs. Weiler.
Sehr schön, dass ich...
Well, thank you for giving me the floor. I've got a request that goes a little further. Having heard what you've just said and actually described early on many occasions on the Concessions Directive, but I'm sure nobody's read that in Germany. My request would be, in fact is, until we decide, it may take a while, till October, say, whether you could talk to the member states, because they would like to see this becoming more objective. Maybe there could be information campaigns there in Germany as well. In certain areas they're in favour, but in the outside world, not everybody's apprised of what's going on. I think, to be honest, some of the campaign, it's a rather strange campaign, does come down to the fact that there are municipalities that are carrying out private business in water and want to do that. Now, I'm against it, but they want to have it, and they're just not being upfront about it. My question, briefly, concerns maybe something you could give us an answer in writing, because it's not actually on the agenda. I'd be interested in how far your work's gone on and preparations for reform of the Toys Directive.
Good question. Mrs. Irigoyen.
Muchas gracias.
I did not get the translation for your last point, Madame Weiler.
Geht ganz schnell. Mich würde...
Yes, I could. Yes, just briefly. I'm just interested in how far your work has come on reforming the Toys Directive.
Okay, thank you.
Which is actually DG Enterprise. I think that's a DG Enterprise matter, actually. But anyway, Mrs. Irigoyen.
Gracias, presidente.
Thanks, Chairman. Just a couple of specific questions, Commissioner. One on preferential shares in financial products. Thousands of Spanish families are suffering. They were deceived by the banks, and so therefore, which measures will the Commission be taking, firstly, to solve current problems that are present and to prevent these situations arising again in the future. You said that in the Single Market Act 2 on insolvency that is relevant. Well, there's a problem with loans and mortgages in my country at the moment, which is causing problems for thousands of Spanish families. They're being evicted and left in the street. Is the Commission intending to come up with new regulations to avoid these kinds of abuses that exist in mortgage contracts? Thank you very much. Just those two questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Irigoyen. Mrs. Gephardt.
Thank you very much. Well, Mr. Barnier, I'd like to thank you as well on clarifying this issue of the multi-communal companies. And that's why I'm very pleased that you've actually come out and said it in public here. Maybe you could point out to your services that they actually do that. Because I did ask you to put forward a proposal on a form of words, and what we got from your services, unfortunately, was not really worthy of anything else than binning, because it didn't say what you've just said. So I'm just withholding my praise for a while, because we like to see that what you promise is actually what turns up. On behalf of Mark Tarabella, maybe I could say that once again you give an assurance, that you repeat the reassurance, that on the public procurement you'll be working strategically together with the Parliament vis-à-vis the Council, and not other files, not necessarily ones you are leading. The experience that we've had, that the Commission is always on the side of the Council, because I think that would give us a good reinsurance. I don't have any more time, so I'll leave the other questions at that.
No, thank you very much. You made your points very clearly. Mr. Schwab, you are going to be the final speaker.
Herr Vorsitzender, Herr Kommissar.
Chairman, Commissioner, 3 points. First of all, single market governance has been mentioned. Of course, the implementation deficit or transposition deficit is an important indicator for member states, but it's not the transposition, it's the use and of current single market law. And we in Parliament, I think, have been very clear in saying that we need more transparency from the Commission on the where the shoe pinches. Secondly, the Right to Water European Citizens Initiative talks about water in very general terms. So I think from the Commission we need a political answer very rapidly, which maybe goes along the lines of what our rapporteur, Mr. Philippe Juvin, has proposed here. We shouldn't wait for too long. I'm sure this citizens' initiative will get the signatories they need, so I think we should get this through quickly so we can discuss it in plenary. Final point on the Single Market Act 3. At the moment, what we're seeing is there are 4 big directives being dealt with at the same time in trialogues here, because at this current time, we have to get through this before the end of term. It's a massive burden of work for us, for colleagues, sometimes an unacceptable level of a burden of work. So I think looking at the Single Market Act 3, that's a goal we shouldn't lose sight of. But let's try and work through what we have on the table at the moment and not try and bite off more than we can chew.
Thank you very much. I'll hand the floor then to Michel Barnier to just deal with those points.
Merci, Président.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Mrs. Ruda, yes, I think that horizontal cooperation is something that's very important, and it's something that we want to ensure. And that's why we have included this kind of cooperation, for example, between local councils that aren't necessarily located next to each other and are sometimes located across borders in our proposals on public sector markets and concessions. Now, it's not sufficient, but the principles we've established remain valid. I mean, there needs to be genuine cooperation, and there need to be rights and responsibilities there. But we do want to foster this kind of horizontal cooperation. I also raised this earlier when it came to road sweepers working in adjoining communes. I mean, the idea was to make best possible effective use of taxpayers' money, but I will be continuing to work on this kind of horizontal cooperation. Mr. Bieland, will the assessment of transposition that we've just published, well, it's not always easy, but we try to come up with facts, figures, and I mean, the snapshot we provide is sometimes difficult for certain countries, but the idea is to encourage those countries that are behind to make progress. And so I use the snapshot to then go and see which governments have the most problems when it comes to transposition, and I'll be seeing the Polish government during the coming weeks. And the idea is to try and help them. I mean, it's not simply a question of telling them off. I mean, I've taken on this commitment of zero tolerance, but that's why I've met all government officials who work on internal market texts and the Services Directive, and the idea is for them to be able to properly implement everything. We don't want to see simply a one-way dialogue with Brussels. We want to give them the feeling that Brussels is working with them, and I think that has been very positive, particularly with regard to the Services Directive. The point on VAT is something that I'll raise with my colleague Mr. Šemeta, who's in charge of tax affairs. I don't have that information in my head. Now, Mr. Kreutzmann, thank you very much. With regard to the clarification, I mean, I'm a politician, you're politicians, and I'm not shocked. I don't have a problem with petitions, public debate, and so on. And that's why I was perhaps a bit harsh earlier on when I stated my own personal principles and the position of the College of Commissioners. We don't want to foster any kind of water privatisation, neither now or in the future. But I heard that my services hadn't done what they said they were going to do. That's Mrs. Gebhard that said that. But what I presented now is something new. It wasn't in the text until this point, but I listened to you. I listened to the rapporteur who proposed this wording. I listened to Mr. Kreutzmann. I listened to what Mr. Schwab had to say. And that's why I believe that that's why I've come up with this new proposal to try and clarify matters. But I'm ready to ask my services to get in touch with you so that we can have a specific meeting on that if you like, so that you can be sure that myself and my services are singing from the same hymn sheet. I wouldn't like to see misunderstandings there. Mrs. Weiler, based on the clarification and the progress that we've just made, and I think it's quite significant because almost all the cases that I got in from Bavaria, Austria or Germany and based on the statement that I've made that there is no desire to see any kind of privatisation to respond to concerns raised in Slovenia. But I think the point is that the text needs to move forward in trilogues with the governments in question. I mean, but we do need to say things as they are. We do need some kind of framework for concessions because there currently isn't one. And the lack of rules can be damaging to taxpayers and citizens because it can produce cases of discrimination, of corruption, and so on. I mean, we have a single market, so we have to continue to work in favour of it. But once again, we're not trying to call into question the public ownership of water. And, of course, local bodies are free and have the right to manage their water as they wish to. Mrs. Irigoyen, now, there was a directive adopted on the 31st of March on mortgage credit. The Irish presidency is pretty convinced that we need to make progress on this, and so am I. I mean, we need to draw lessons from one of the aspects of the crisis. We need to find agreement in trialogue now. I even have the dates on which those meetings will be held. And we really need to ensure that mortgage credit is covered in its widest sense is Mr. Presedo, that is the rapporteur of this, and he's really showing a great deal of goodwill. But just to avoid any misunderstanding, Mrs. Irigoyen, I'm Commissioner for the Internal Market and Services. I am coming up with preventive texts, reactive texts, and all kinds of texts to try and ensure the crisis doesn't return and that we draw the appropriate lessons. So I would say here that no sector, no financial player, no financial sector will be able to escape some kind of regulation. I've proposed 28 laws, excuse me, in 3 years, and many of them have been adopted. For example, with regard to technical standards, derivatives, the regulation of derivatives. I mean, this is a major subject. $600 billion, which are somewhere out there in the ether. I mean, there are all these off-counter transactions as well. And, I mean, I was in the United States last week, and I saw that, and I was calling for the US and other G20 partners to do the same thing. But the fact is that all these laws won't be able to repair the damages caused by the past crisis. I mean, these are things that we're doing for the future. We're implementing supervision, governance, prudential rules, capitalisation and so on. All that's for the future. I also strengthened the Commission's proposals on market abuses, so that when bankers have manipulated matters or embezzled, that they go to prison. We've criminalised these kinds of activities and we've increased the sanctions for the worst cases of embezzlement. But there are other tools, both at the national and European level, which can be preventive rather than preventive tools to help citizens who are affected by the current crisis. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. Thank you for your question. I'll get back on certain matters in writing during the coming days. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, as always. And we've had 15 questions. I think it's an all-time record. You've dealt with all. And I will continue to keep in touch. But thank you very much indeed for coming to us this morning. Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
Did you see that? Have you seen the head?